Hi, I'm Laurence Parker-Brown. Welcome to the Inside Network. Welcome to this INDepth for the Inside Network. Looking at demystifying alternative risk premia investing, we're delighted to be joined by the portfolio manager at K2 Advisors, Paul Fraynt. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So for an advisor, particularly that's trying to help a client understand your portfolio, what guidance would you give them if they're trying to capture this as a concept that a client would be interested in?
The number one finance kind of 101 rules that we all learn in school is diversification is the only free gift in finance. And therefore, when you try to diversify, the best idea to diversify is to find multiple sources of returns. So when we're looking at a typical 60-40 portfolio, you have just two asset classes, equities and bonds, two sources of returns. But with what I do, which is a global risk premium, multi-asset risk premium, you have multitude of additional sources of returns. We, for example, in our portfolio, we use 25 different signals, so 25 different sources of returns. You can massively diversify, therefore improve risk-reward in the final portfolio. That does include something that we do, something we call risk premium.
So you're looking at those 25 different signals, multi-strategy. Can you talk to us about the liquidity that you're finding in the portfolio?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So because by definition, what we do in the risk premium space trades FX and G10 FX pairs, trades global bonds and rates, trade global equity indices. Those are all some of the most liquid securities in the world. Therefore, as a result, in what we do, we see that clients have daily liquidity, so which is considerably better than some of the additional asset classes that people can consider in alternative space.
And we're seeing some volatility in markets. How can alternative risk premia support, particularly in terms of that diversification piece of the puzzle?
When it comes to diversification, by its very, very definition, is the idea that it allows to minimize or at least lessen the overall volatility of the final portfolio. So when we're talking about different sources of return, it means that they are uncorrelated and therefore minimize overall volatility when you add them together in a portfolio. But more importantly, it doesn't mean that they are not cyclical. So equities are cyclical, bonds are cyclical, FX value, which is one of the risk premium strategies, so equity, momentum, they're all cyclical strategies or cyclical ideas. But the whole idea behind risk premium is that the cycle is different and distinct from a cycle of, say, let's long equities or long bonds. So once you combine these different strategies or different ideas, different asset classes, which have positive expected returns but different cycle, overall volatility begins to cancel each other out, and overall return becomes a smoother profile for final portfolio.
Coming back to that final portfolio, for an advisor that wants to bring this in, we can see the potential upside, but what are some of the challenges in integrating your portfolio within the traditional 60-40?
Typically, the advantage would be kind of obvious, right? I mean, diversification, different source of returns, and once you kind of conceptualize that and put it together, and even look at the history of those returns, it becomes kind of self-fulfilling proposition. But one of the biggest challenges, which is what we found, is that people are less familiar with that. People are a lot more familiar with what S&P 500 or global equity have done, or bonds. Those are typically that's where the knowledge, financial knowledge, kind of begins to tail pretty quickly, and that's unfortunate because, as we said earlier, diversification is a key benefit to the portfolio. In fact, it's the only gift, as I said before, in finance. And so, learning about the strategies, which, by the way, have been known sometimes for a century, like trend, momentum, FX value. Those strategies have been developed, or at least initially written about, back in 1930s. So we're talking about something that's been developed for a very long period of time and existed for a long period of time and has been tested and proven to work for decades. And yet the knowledge or the acceptance, not only the acceptance, but the knowledge and the comfort with this type of strategies is still lagging. Now, recently it has really picked up. Alternatives have become a lot more popular and people have been adding them to the portfolio, but it still remains a bit of a challenge, a little bit of awareness. And what I would like to point out about the strategies is that they're not black box, meaning when something is not working, we do know why. It's not something, it's important just to engage in a conversation either with your research person, your advisor, your portfolio manager, who will be able to explain why, for example, equity value. Equity value is one of the most commonly well-known strategies in alternative risk premia. It didn't work for a long period of time, between 2017, 2018, and even earlier and through end of 2021. And then it suddenly snapped back to life and it delivered fantastic returns starting 2022. Why did it not work? Different cycle. Specifically for a period of time when it didn't work, it's because central banks were unleashing enormous amounts of monetary supply. Financial institutions stepped in 2020 to combat a pandemic and being locked down at home. And so what happened is that they completely destroyed any income available to common savers, right? Interest rates went to zero, to negative, and so there was no income. And the only way to save for retirement was for people to bet on some kind of growth. So those expensive growth stocks kept on appreciating, which value factor typically short, and value stocks just kept on lagging behind. So once zero interest rates finally came to an end, that era has come to an end, that equity value began to work.
Let's have a final question then that links back to including it in the portfolio. A lot of advisors have looked to alternatives, whether that's private markets, liquid alts, and they come with different roles to play. Do you see this as a defensive role it could play? Is it generating income? Where would it fit in the portfolio?
Oh, the risk premium is so customizable that it can play actually multiple roles, from income to being defensive to being risk on. There are a variety of different ways and different strategies to play. So, for example, FX value traditionally would be considered to be defensive addition to the portfolio. While FX carry is very much risk on and correlated with equities, for example. What I would like to point out is that when we build strategies, we typically suggest to clients, depending on what they need in their portfolio, that defensiveness of risk premium is probably by far the most attractive feature, because, as you mentioned, other asset classes such as private debt, private equity, even though they are diversifying to traditional equities and bonds in the portfolio, they're still highly correlated with traditional equities and bonds by definition, by simply being private but still equity, private but still bond credit. Risk premium can come with a negative correlation and yet still positive returns to all of those asset classes. So by definition, it's much more diversified and therefore, in my opinion, very attractive and belongs in the typical portfolio.
I think that's been a very compelling answer, and I think you've helped demystify alternative risk premium investing. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you for your time.